Let's
We're
go.
holding Yud Ches Amud Beis 18b4 at the new parak. Okay, so now, as you know, we've got 3 sets of fasts. The first set of fasts is if the reign of Mar Cheshvan, the beginning known as Yoire, as in Yoire Umaltosh, the first 3 reigns known as Yoire, do not show up. So then we've got our first, the Hasidim, the special guys, you know, the distinguished members of the society started fasting. Then we had the second set of 3 fasts, and if that doesn't help, then we have the series of 7 fasts, which are very stringent in nature. So this Mishnah begins. Say the Taanis Elu ha'omer. The order of fasts mentioned above that we just talked about, the Revia Rishona, applies only when the first rains were delayed, meaning the Yaira rains, the 3 rains of Mar Cheshvan that should have rained, they didn't show up. But Avol Samachim Shishanu, if the crops changed, they grew abnormally, they were stunted, right? Which is an emergency, since now the crops will become completely ruined. Misradin Aleim Yad, we cry out immediately. So that means if we see, and what does that mean? We cry out immediately? That we immediately put in the stringencies of the chumras of the series of 7 fasts. Means we go immediately straight, we skip steps. If the crops, we can see them shriveling up, they're going abnormal, we immediately throw in the most stringent of our fasts. The chain, and also, if between the first rains of Mar Cheshvan and the second rains of Kislev, there's a 40-day gap after the last rains of the first series, of the Yoire. And the Beinani rains and the middle rains do not show up after 40 days, Misrayin Alei, we immediately cry out on them. Because Shuhu Makis Bitzoris. This is an affliction of food storage. That language of Makas Bitzoris, a Maka, an affliction of food shortage, the Gemara will talk about it. There's 2 ways of looking at food storage. Everybody's got money in their pocket, but there's not enough food, so the prices have gone through the roof. Okay? Or even if the prices have not gone through the roof, there's a supply chain problem. There's not enough food. Or there's plenty of food, but the economy sucks, and therefore there's not enough money in people's pockets to buy the food. It sounds eerily familiar to today, as you're going to see in the Gemara. Okay? He says the Mishnah further, Yardu l'tzamachim, if the rains fell for the crops, Avullah yardu le'ilon, but not for the trees. Okay, so which means enough rain for the crops, but not enough for trees. Le'ilon, or a rain strongly for trees, but not benachas, not soft rain for the crops. Or zel, there was rain for both the crops and the trees. Avullah but not for the water holes, ditches, and caves where the drinking water was stored. Misan alei, we cry out immediately. That means, again, we go straight to the series of 7 fasts. Similarly, a city in which no rain fell, but the surrounding cities, the surrounding towns, got enough rain, which indicates that this city specifically is being punished. Because it says, V'himtarti al ir echos v'al ir achas lo yamtir. Because I will cause it to rain on one city, and on one city I will cause it not to rain. Chelka achas timata, on one field I will have it rain, and on one field I will not. We are now on today's daf. Yud Tes Amid Aleph, and as you can see, the Mishnah goes all the way down to the end of the Amid. Just about. Now, I saw here that city which was receiving no rain. We're again on 1981. Misana Misras immediately fasts and cries out. We're talking again about the major fast, the 7th. And all its surrounding cities, the surrounding cities do fast, but do not cry out. And Rashi says very interesting. Take a look at the top Rashi. Okay? Because Lefichach Misanois Sha'oiseir Sha'yorud Aleim Gishomim, right? Because this city, they cry, even though they had rain, they cry about the city that did not have rain. Because what will this city, which has no rain and therefore no crops, do? Telech Likanes Hatipur Ba'itzair will go and have to travel to the cities that did get rain and buy their grain from there. Rav. And what will happen is then there will be a food shortage even in the city that got rain, because more people than usual will be coming to buy their crops. And eventually there's going to be a supply problem. So therefore, even though you got rain, you still should daven for the city that didn't get rain, because otherwise they're coming to you and buying up your teruah, and then there's going to be a shortage all the way around. Of course, the other reason is because the other reason, which of course the Ran says, that if you're in the same province, in the same, you sympathize with your neighbors, right? You should sympathize with your neighbors and daven for them. And amidst Hashem, actually, this idea that you have to say, Imoy anoichi b'tzara, I am with you in your pain, even you, when you see they are in a state of distress, is in fact learn from this week's parsha, which amidst Hashem, I will be talking about, hopefully with Hashem's help. We'll be talking about this Friday, okay? On the Gemara that we have learned back on that period on the days with regard to Yaakov and Mishpat. Anyways, back to the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva Aimer, second line in the art scroll, second line in the Gemara on the dot. Rabbi Akiva Aimer, Rabbi Akiva says, Misriyos, in fact, the surrounding cities cry out, they do not have to fast. And the answer is very simple. Rabbi Akiva looks at it like it's Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, you cry out, but you don't fast. The Tanakama looks at it as like a Yom Kippur, where you fast, but you don't cry out. This that we blow on the shofar at the end of Ne'ilah is only tradition, is only a minute, it's not a din. The whole ear, sheyesh by dever, and any city that has a plague, which is very similar to what we're going through now with Corona, or a collapse of buildings, like happened in Surfside, or the city wall, or the buildings of the city wall because of heavy winds. In the case of the collapse in Surfside, is because it was built along the waterline, which the Gemara previously said is something that has to be very careful about. But this is because of winds. The afflicted city fasts and cries out. And the surrounding cities fast but do not cry out. And Rabbi Akiva says just the opposite. The surrounding cities, Masriyas, cry out, but do not fast. Now, Ezehu Dever, what is considered a plague? A city that has 500 men on foot, and one of the pshatim, and it's a nice pshat, from the Oitzah Goinim, is that 500 men, able-bodied men that are available for military duty. Okay? Gimel Mason, and 3 people die naturally. Begimel Yomim Zeh, 3 days in a row, 3 consecutive days, 1 man on each day. Hareza Deva, this is a pestilence, this is a plague. Pachas Mikan, Ein Zeh Deva, this is not a Deva. Al Elu Misrayim B'chol Makim, and on the following we cry out everywhere. Wherever the news of this calamity reaches, you gotta cry out. because it's possible for this calamity to reach your place as well. And again, it's also because if you can hear about it and it's within your geographic region, you should also have sympathy and empathy for those who are suffering. Ala shidofine, that's a wind blast that ruins the grains. Balarek yerokain, the yellowing, the plant, the growth of the grains start yellowing and withering. Ba'ala arba balaksil, on the regular locusts, which are the arba, which is just the thousands and thousands of locusts. Ba'ala kasil, the kasil is a much smaller variety of locusts. Vegetation quickly. And our dangerous animals that are attacking human beings, like let's say in India, the tigers that are attacking, or a rabid lion that is attacking humans. And on the sword, if an army is marching through the land, because when an army marches through the land, in the civil the General Sherman's march right through Georgia, right? They destroyed the entire countryside because he did it deliberately to break their spirit. We cry out to these calamities because it's a calamity that travels. If these are in one locale, you have to assume that it's going to travel everywhere around, right? Within 100-mile radius, let's say. It happened once that the members, the elders of the Sanhedrin Gedolah of the Supreme Court, left Yerushalayim and went to their various cities where they lived because of Taanis, and they decreed a Taanis. Why? Al Shenira Kimoloi P Tano Shidofon Ba'ashkelon. Because they saw a wind blast damage of grains the size of an oven's mouth. That's not even a lot. Where? In Ashkelon. Where's Ashkelon? In the southwest border of Eretz Yisrael, which was an area where the Galatians lived in the time of the Torah Kedoshim. And they also were geyser of fast. Because of the story that wolves they decree because wolves ate the children. Because they were seen near the city. The wolves, which normally hide in the woods and are nowhere near populated areas, were seen in the populated areas. In fact, Rabbi Yosi and the Tanakama are allowed arguing with each other. It could very well be that Rabbi Yosi was merely correcting and saying, in fact, the story was not that they were eaten, but that they were seen in the city, and the parents were frightened that the children might get eaten. So, now, the Mishnah goes further and says, as we all know, on Shabbos and Yom Tov, it's forbidden to fast. And more than forbidden to fast, on Shabbos and Yom Tov, it is also, it's prohibited to ask for things. That's why the Shemona Esrei of Shabbos is much shorter than the regular weekday Shemona Esrei, because the tefillah is in the middle of us asking for things we don't do on Shabbos. Hashem Yisbarach is thing. We're holding 19A1 on the bottom. 19A1 on the bottom. Good morning, Jeff. 19A1 on the bottom, which are about to turn to 19A2. I'm just giving again. So Shabbos, we're not allowed to fast normally, and we're not allowed to ask for supplications, if we're going to use a fancy word. You're not allowed to ask for stuff. Nonetheless, there are circumstances where those rules do not apply. We are now on 19A2. 19A2. Okay? Just give me a second. I just want to get to find my place over here in the Gemara. Very good. Al Elu Nisanim b'Shabbos. There are certain situations where we cry out, even on Shabbos. Okay? Now, this stuff right here. Believe my high school Gentiles. Today we have a hard time understanding this, except we shouldn't. When you have riots, a riot is one step away from pogrom. Never forget that. Jewish history knows this. And when the Goyim are riled up, there's riots taking place and civil society is breaking down, we are in big danger. Because it's a thin line from a pogrom to let's blame the Jews and burn them out. And within the last 100 years, there have been many an example of what I just said. I don't even have to explain it. So that's the first line over there. If that happens on a Shabbos, we cry out even on a Shabbos, Aneni Hashem Aneni. What do we cry out? Help me, answer me, Hashem, answer me. Al ear shekufa nachrim, in the ear that's beleaguered by hostile Gentiles. Oy nahar, or the river is threatening to flood. Or a ship that's tossing in the sea and in danger of sinking. Rabbi Yosi, just give me a second. Rabbi Yosi says, Le'ezra b'loy letzaka. We're allowed to cry out for assistance, but we're not allowed to call out in prayer. Meaning that b'tzibur, publicly, we're not allowed to come together in the shul and daven together publicly, a tefillas rabbim, to ask for supplication from heaven to save us. But yechidi, privately, and each one of us in our homes can grab a tehillim, a psalms, and daven to HaKadosh Baruch to save us. That's number one. That's what Rabbi Yosi is here come to say. Why? Because who said we're going to be answered? Since it's a suffix, it's an uncertain that God is going to answer our tefillos. Therefore, since it doesn't override the prohibition, the definite prohibition of not asking for supplications on Shabbos. Since there is a prohibition of asking for supplications on Shabbos, and we have this thing, it's an issue of bari v'shem. It's a maybe that our supplication will be responded to by heaven. Bari v'shem or bari od, if the bari stays first. And that's what Rabbi Yosi holds. And by the way, that's the halacha. It's like basket the Rambam. Maimonides says that's what we do. We cry out privately, but not publicly. Shimon HaTimoni, Shimon HaTimoni Shimon HaTimoni says, okay, from the Shimon from the city of Timnah, Af ala deber, even on a plague, we cry out on Shabbos. We cry out on Shabbos, even on Shabbos. But the Chachamim did not agree with the Seder. Did not agree with Rabbi Shimon Timnah. They said instead daven privately. Al kol tzara shelo tovei al tzibur, for every calamity that we hope does not fall on the community. Misarin aleim, we cry out to them, chutz miroiv geshamim, except for excessive rain. The excessive rain that does not destroy the crops, but is very bothersome to the people. If it's bothersome to us, we don't daven for the rain to stop. Because at the end of the day, the rain is a bracha, is a blessing. We're getting caught in the rain. We can't play golf during the weekdays because it's raining and the Grove is always shutting down the golf course. No, you're put out. But it's open. We never daven for rain to stop when the crops are not in danger of being completely flooded. Okay? Having said that, comes our Mishnah and now goes through one of the most famous stories in all of the Talmud. The famous story of Chayni Yamagel, Chayni the circle maker. Now, Why is he called the circle maker? The circle maker? He's called the circle maker because of the story we're about to say. Here comes the story. Everybody knows this story. There's also a second half to this story, which I think the Gemara may talk about, but we'll get to it. Maisa, there was a story. Where there was no rain. And so they came to Chaini, the circle maker. But right now, Hamagel means the circle maker. Now, we should read this right now as Chaini. They came to Chaini. And because of this story, he becomes Hamagel. They asked him, his follow Shiyirdu Geshamim, pray that rain should fall. The rain was not falling. Amalahem, he said to them, and it was already the end of the season. Bring in the ovens that they were preparing for the roasting of the Pesach offerings. That means we were at the end of Adar, the beginning of Nisan, there still hadn't been rain. So he said like this, bring in your ovens. Why? So they should not get dissolved in the rain. Chaini was so sure that if he davens, the rain will fall. But guess what happened? His spalul below yardu geshamim. He davened, and the rain did not fall because he didn't show anivus, he didn't show humility. He was so sure his tefillas would be answered that he told people to bring in their ovens so they shouldn't be dissolved in the rain. He wasn't answered right away. So what did he do now that he wasn't answered? Ma also, oig uga, he drew a circle around him. He took the thing and he made a circle around him. And he said, and he stood within it. And he said to the Rabbi Shalom, to the master of the world, Rabbi Shalom, master of the world, your children have turned their face towards me. Because I am like a member of your household before you, Hashem Yisbarach. Nishba ani b'shimcha agadol, I swear by your great name, she'eino izos mikan ad she'terachem al banecha, that I will not move from this circle until you have mercy on your children. Well, all right. So now the Rabbi Shalom was okay. Hischel geshamim minatfin. The rain began to trickle. The Chani Amagel said, no. Like Kachshalti, that's not what I'm asking for. Little bit of rain. But enough rain to fill the water holes, the ditches, and the caves. So the rains came down in a fury. As soon as it filled up all the ditches and the watering holes for people's drinking water, Chaini said, "Loi Kachshalti, that's not what I was asking for. Ela gishmei rotzaim bracha unedava, rather rain of goodwill, blessing, and benevolence. Yardu kisiknon, and then the rain fell normally. Ad sheyaser Yisrael mi Yerushalayim harabayis, and it rained so much that the Yidden of Yerushalayim left the lowland of Yerushalayim and went up the mountain of the Harabayis, the Temple Mount, Mivnei Geshamim, because of the rains. So then, Bayu v'Oimruloi, the people came to him, Keshem sheyispal aleim sheyardu, just like you prayed for the rains to fall. Please, Kach ispal shiloch lehem, pray that it should stop. Now, on this, Chaini did not immediately pray for the rain to stop, because we don't pray for rain to stop if it's not destroying the crops and it's only driving people crazy. That we don't do. We just said that. We just learned that halacha. So Amalahem, he said to them, go see if the stone of the strayers, meaning the lost and found, there was a stone in a raised place. That's where anybody found something and didn't know who the owner was, they would put over there. It was a public lost and found. See if that stone had been completely covered with water. Because if that stone is covered with water, that means we already got too much rain. So when he heard that the guy that stone was covered with rain, he davened for the rain to stop. So on that, Shalach lo Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach sent Chayni Amagel this message. Imoy lichani Chayni ato. Were you not the great Chayni? Gazrani alecha nidui. 1983. I would have put you into Cherem. I would have put a ban on you. Why? Because how do you talk to the Rabbi Shlomo this way? How do you talk to God this way? I'm telling you, I'm standing in this circle and I'm not going out until you send the rain. And this rain is no good. And this rain is no good. You got to do it the way I'm asking. So he said, you talk to the Rabbi Shlomo that way, even though he just made all the rain fall. He said, I would have put you into excommunicate you, put a ban on you. Elama eselach lecha. But what can I do with you? Because you misbehave in front of the omnipresent, in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by boldly demanding for rain. And yet HaKadosh Baruch Hu fulfills your wish. Like a son who misbehaves towards his father by boldly demand to get him whatever he wants. And the father actually fills his wish. On you, the pasuk is meant. May your father and your mother rejoice, and may she who bore you be glad. Now the Mishnah finishes. If they had been fasting from before dawn, they woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, they started fasting. And the rain began to fall before sunrise. Lo yashlimu. They don't have to complete the fast because they can stop fasting immediately because the daytime didn't start yet for the actual beginning of the fast. They started a little early. You start a little early, that doesn't mean that you really started because the fast really begins from daybreak to sundown. But if the rain begins to fall after sunrise, Yashlimu, then they should complete the fast. Rabbi Eliezer Aimed, Koidim Chatzos. It's talking about half the day. Koidim Chatzos, midday. Lo Yishamenu. If the rain fell before midday, you're allowed to stop at midday and you don't have to keep going. La'achar Chatzos. If it falls after midday, Yashlimu, you should complete the fast. Ma'aseh Shegazu Taanis Belud. There was a time when they established a fast in Lud for rain. And rain fell before midday. Amalei Rav Tarfon told them, go out, eat, drink, and make it into a yontif. So they stopped fasting, they went out, they ate and drank and made a yontif. And then they came back to the shul and they all recited together the great Hallel. The great Hallel is Kapitel 136. That's the one we say on Shabbos. The reason why, because right in the middle of it is the words, because he gives bread to all flesh, because he's always full of loving kindness. So in order to say those words, they would pray that. Very good. We finally finished the Mishnah. So we've got a problem now. The says was I got a brisa that seems to be saying different than our Mishnah. So say that our Mishnah said, say the Taanis say when the first rains are delayed. This applies that we begin fasting even if the first rains are delayed. We've got a brisa that says if there's a delay of the first and second rains, we need to pray. Shlishis l'sainas. If the third rains, we're required to fast. And for the Gemara, no. It's all one and the same. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, hel chikama. This is what the Mishnah means. Say the Taanis on the Masai. The order of the fast that when do we apply it? Bisman sheyatsa revia rishayna b'shniya b'shlishi. It means when the normal time of the first, second, and third rains of Mar Cheshvan of the Yoira rains, of the first rains. It doesn't mean that on the 7th of Marcheshvan, the first rain didn't fall, and on the 17th it didn't fall, and on the 23rd it didn't fall. That's only then do you fast. That's one set. But if the rains fell in the time of the first rains of Marcheshvan, and the people planted their seeds, but then the seeds did not grow. It did not grow. Because of an or they grew, but they changed. They grew abnormally. They grew stunted. The begin to cry out on account of them. They only do it, they cry out and fast only when the plants change. In other words, they begin to change because they begin to yellow. But if they completely dry up, they do not. And Rashi, if you take a look at the bottom of the skinny part of Rashi, before it gets big, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 lines from when the lines get skinny, up the skinny lines towards the bottom. It says, Alva Yaveshu, if it dried out, like Sarach Mikam Be'elech, you don't have to pray from this point on, Lo Yolim, because it doesn't help. Once the Gezerah, once it happens that they all dried up, there's nothing to be done. For who tefillah shav, afilu yavashu mikeshein chitin adayin dakin, even if the wheat is there, very thin, because once the gezerah is put into place, once it's in place and now it's gone, completely dried up, there's nothing you can do. Your davening is not going to bring it back to life. This is very similar. When a woman gets pregnant, once she reaches after 40 days or so, of getting pregnant, I believe it's 40 days, or maybe it's the first trimester, she should not pray for which sex the baby should be, male or female. Because once it's set into motion, it's set. Pray that the baby should be healthy. Yes, every day. Daven that the baby should be healthy, that the baby should grow up happy and content and serve the Rebbeinu Shalom all the days of its life. Yes. But to daven for the sex, you don't do once you reach a certain point, because at that point it's already set. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to change nature for you. That's not the way it works. Okay? But before it's in place, you absolutely. So that's what Rav Nachman is saying. Rav Nachman, Davka Shenishtada, when it changed, that's when you should cry out. But if it already dried up, don't cry out of that. Pshita says, well, that's obvious. Nishtanu Tanan. We're now on 1984. The Mishnah taught explicitly they changed. So like Tzaricha, the Otkin, where the stalks grew somewhat after the crops dried up. Mao, the same I might have thought, Akana Milsihi, the growth of the stalks are significant, and that maybe the crops could recover. Kamash Malon, that no. Once the crops are dried out, they cannot possibly recover, even if the stalks continue to grow. Says the Mishnah further, and even if the rains came, but then there was a break of 40 days between the first set of rains and the second set of rains, we cry out because it's an affliction of food shortage. So, the Gemara, my market pitzaris. What does it mean, an affliction of food storage? An affliction that leads to food shortage. I want everybody to think about the world we're currently living in now. We have a supply chain problem. We have shortages in the supermarkets. We have a Makkah, Corona, COVID. Think about COVID is a direct correlation to the food shortage. This is what this Gemara is going to talk about. Gemara is going to say there are times when there's a food storage even when people have money to buy. And there are times when we have food and it's cheap enough, but people don't have money to pay for it. The economy stinks. And today we're dealing with both on some level. Amar Rav Nachman, the Gemara here is going to literally sound very similar to our world that we're living in today. The Gemara distinguishes between the less severe food shortage and the more severe famine. Amar Rav Nachman, Nahara Nahar, river to river. We're now on Amid Bays, 19b1. But Cyrus, that is a food shortage, where food is scarce in one city, but food could be found in another city through transport. The situation is only a food shortage, not a full-fledged famine. Medinasa, the Medinasa Kanfa. But it's from one state to another state, then it is a famine. When food is scarce in one city, it has to be imported from another city by land, by trucking. The situation is deemed a famine. The price of wheat is inflated. For one set of wheat is costing one selah, which is very expensive. But the wheat is plentiful. That's B'tziris. That's a food shortage. Okay? In other words, there's food, but the supply and demand has raised the price of food. There's inflation, and people are having trouble paying for it. That's a food shortage. Arba v'loy shri. When the price of wheat is cheap, it's 4 cents for a seller. You get 4 sets of wheat, not 1 set of wheat, but 4 sets of wheat for 1 seller. The wheat, the price is cheap, but the wheat is not plentiful. It's just not there. In other words, there's plenty of stock, but there's some reason it's not getting to us. It's not getting to us. So overall, it's cheap, but we can't get it to us. Kafna, that is a famine. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Neloi shanu ela bizman shamoyis bezul. Where money is inexpensive, people have money to spend, inflation is contained, or Paris Bianca, but the produce is expensive because it's the supply and demand. So the money is, people have money in their pocket, they have the money, but the prices have started to go up. When the money is expensive, meaning the economy is depressed, and people do not have savings. People are poor. Even if the produce is result and the produce is actually cheap, we cry out immediately on its account. Because the bottom line is there could be plenty of food, but if people can't afford to pay for it, we've got a problem. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Nihira kad havi kamei dalet sim besela. I remember when 4 seh sold for 1 selah. That means that was the normal price. For 1 selah, you got 4. For 1 selah, you got 4 seh of wheat. But there were plenty of people whose bellies were swollen from hunger in Tiberia, since there was no money with which to purchase the food. Shevach v'Idah, the nation Yisrael, Mikamchi Yisrael Ge'erech Baretz. Nowhere was the stupid idea that if you're poor, you're allowed to steal the food. Doesn't say that. It says we daven. If the people are poor, if the economy stinks, and even if the prices are right, people can't afford to buy it, that doesn't give him permission to go ransack people's stores and steal the stuff. You pick yourself up, you go into shul and you daven, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu picks up the situation. Yardu litzamachim, in other words, the morals of the world today are completely on its head. Yardu litzamachim avuloi le'ilon. If rain fell for crops but not for trees, or it did rain for both but not for the reservoirs, we cry out. So the Gemara says like this. What are we talking about here? I can understand rain that falls for crops and not for trees. It's when the light rains come, but the heavy rains don't come. Light rains are beneficial for crops, but trees require a lot of rain. I can understand trees are not for crops. When the rain comes down heavy, but light rains did not come. But in rain, that's lazel. Rain came, light rain for the crops, and then heavier rain for the trees. But not enough water for the water holes, ditches, and caves. Why? You just told me we both had rain that was heavy, that was good for the trees, and light rain that came that was good for the crops. But a lot did not come. So the reservoirs did not fill up. But that it was taught. But if the rains fell for the waterhole, ditches, and caves, but not for the trees and the crops, how could you have that? If enough water fell to fill the waterholes, how could it be that it didn't benefit the trees and the crops? And for the Gemara, it was like a tremendous downpour, like we sometimes get in Boca Raton, right? Where the rain comes down with a fury, right? That could fill up the reservoirs, but it's certainly not good for the trees and the crops. Tanu Rabbanan, Misanin alo ilonos peroses haPesach. We cry out for rains on the account of the trees that have not gotten enough water Pesach time, by the spring. Ala boyes v'sichnu maris proses achag. On account of water holes, ditches, and caves, we're now on 19b2, that have not been filled up from Sukkot time. And other Mefarshim explain, no, not Sukkot, but in fact Shavuos, which is also called Chag. And that is because the pilgrims that come, who are Oila Rikolim, the ones who come up for the regels, the 3 regels, by the time you get to Shavuos, they've got to have water to drink. If we don't got enough water, we've got a problem. If they don't have enough water to drink, we cry out immediately on their account, even in the summer months. What does it mean immediately? It means that they cry out Sheni v'chamishi v'sheni. The famous Bahab, the Bays for Monday, the Hay 5 for Chamishi for Thursday, and the Bays again for Monday, number 2. And that's what we do a lot of times. A lot of people, especially the Chassidim, will fast after every Rosh Chodesh on the Monday, Thursday, and Monday following Rosh Chodesh. In regard to all of them, we cry out on their account only within the affected country. Okay, only in the affected country. That's where you cry out, where the rain didn't fall correctly. The askara, but if the disease known as askara, which was a terrible throat disease that literally strangled people, when the askara is causing death, we absolutely cry out on its account. When it's people are only getting sick, but they're recovering, we do not cry out on its account. We cry out on account of any goiva locust, even for the slightest amount. Even if only a few of the goiva locusts are seen, the goiva locusts are the majority of locusts when they come in a swarm. So even if we only see a few, you could assume the rest of the swarm is coming. Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, even on the chagav locust, even if you only see a few of them, usually, even though they are a minority of the locusts, they are the locusts that devour the crops. So you go ahead and you daven if you only see a few of them. Tanu Rabbanan, Masrinin ala Yilonos, we cry out on the insufficient rain for trees, B'shar Shnei Sabua, during the other years of the 7-year cycle, but not during Shemitah, since all the fruits of that year are ownerless. But on account of insufficient water for the reservoirs, we cry out our people with shvius, even on shvius, because people need to drink. But on this comes from Shimon ben Gamliel, we cry out on the Shemitah year, even on insufficient rain for the trees, because they provide the parnasa, the sustenance for the poor. Tanya Ida, because the poor are allowed to pick from there, even on Shvius. Tanya Ida, Masrin and Ali Ilonis, we cry out on insufficient rain for the trees. B'shayi Matashuna on 6 of the 7-year cycle, but not in the Shemitah year. On the watering holes, the reservoirs, even in the Shemitah year. Even in the for the insufficient water for the trees, even in Shemitah, and not only that, says Reb Shimon, we even cry out if the aftergrowth of plants there's insufficient water for them. We cry out for them even on Shvius. Why? Because they provide substance for the poor. Tanya, we learned. Amir Rabbi Elazar ben Parata, says Rabbi Elazar ben Parata, Miyayim Shechara Beis Hamikdash, from the day when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Nasu Geshamim Simukim Liyoyim. Rain has been tightened for the world. The rain does not fall freely because all brachas come from Eretz Yisrael, and all brachas of Eretz Yisrael come from Yerushalayim and the Arabayas. Now that it's no longer there, the bracha is harder, it doesn't flow as easily. There are years when the rain is abundant. That the rain is less, sparse. There are times when the rain falls in its proper time. There are times when the rain does not fall in its proper time. The years where the rain falls in its proper time, what is it compared to? A master who gives his servant enough grain on Sunday, so he has a sufficient time to properly bake the dough, even for the next Shabbos. It turns out his bread is baked properly, and he can eat it properly. A year where the rain does not fall in its right time. What is it like? We're on 19B3. 19B3, just give me a second. 19B3. On the other hand, the year whose rain did not fall in its proper time. To what can it be? What can it be compared? La'ebed shenosalai rabbi panosei be'erev Shabbos, to an ebed whose master gives him his weekly grain only on Friday, and he doesn't have enough time to bake the dough completely for Shabbos. As a result, the dough is not baked properly and it cannot be eaten properly. A year that the rains are abundant, it's like, what can it compare to? A servant whose master gives him his entire year's allotment all at once, so that he can grind his wheat supply for the entire year all at one time. As a result, the millstones grind from a core the same amount that they grind from a calf. In other words, when you grind things, certain amount of loss happens because of stuff that sticks to the grind wheels. That doesn't matter if you do a little amount or you do a big amount. The loss is more or less the same. So therefore, it pays to do a bigger amount because then your loss is only a small amount. But if you do only a little amount, then you have a loss. The next time you do a little amount, you again have a loss. So each time you lose more of what's left behind on the grind if you do little amounts at a time as opposed to one-time manufacturing. The resulting in the kneading of the dough consumes as much from a core as it consumes from a calf. So your loss is the same. But when the rain is sparse, like a master who gives his yearly allotment of grain only drop by drop, just the opposite. Result, the millstones were growing from a core, what they grind from a calf. Each time you grind a little bit, you're losing some stuff that's left behind, stuck in the grind. each time, which means your losses are piling up greater each time you use it. The more you, each time that you have to use it. Dober acher. Bisman shegeshmem merubin lamu doiman. When the year's rains are abundant, what does it mean? Lovers can iskabelis atit. It's like a person who needs clay. And yeshlo mayim rabim. If he has enough water, mayim ain't a kolon atit megula yavet. The water is not used up, and the clay is needed properly. And yeshlo mayim mu'atim, but he only has a little water. Mayim kolon, the water gets used up. Atit ain't a miskabel yafa, and the clay is not needed properly. Very good. This is where we're stopping. Over here.